you watching? All right, it's 3:02. I think we've got a couple of people joined us. Thanks everyone for joining this afternoon. This is week 3 of our Facebook Live budget conversations. I'm very pleased to have two of my friends, my fellow council members that I consider friends, and I'm very lucky, fortunate to serve with them as my guest this afternoon. This afternoon, we want to talk about the budget substitutes, and Councilmember Emily Benedict and Councilmember Freddie O'Connor are two of the sponsors of these 4 substitutes that we have. And so this afternoon, we want to get into a conversation to be able to understand their point of view on the substitutes. But more than anything, as I've always said, these conversations is about the communities, about all of you out there, giving you an opportunity to give us your feedback, to ask your questions, to be involved in the process. There are other ways for you to be involved. All of your council members have newsletters. All of them are doing different things. There's going to be a public hearing on June 2nd. And so you have other ways of being engaged. But this is just another one, a way for you to be able to ask questions. So I'm not going to belabor it. We already got 14 people. Oh my God. And it's only 1 minute. So I think this is going to be a doozy. Thanks to everyone that is joining. And so, Councilmember Benedict and O'Connor, thank you for joining me this afternoon. I know it's a busy time for all of us, so thank you for taking the time to come on the show.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much, and please call me Emily throughout the broadcast.
I love that. I love that. I love that. So you have any name you want me to call you, Freddie?
You can call me Freddie. That's fine.
I like that. I like that. So I know everybody's waiting and everybody wants to dive into the budget substitute, and we would do that. But I thought before we get into the serious stuff, I want some light conversations. Talk. You can call it icebreaker if you wish. And so I'm going to start with Emily. You and I are both rookies. We just got elected not too long ago. And it's been some couple of months. So can you share with us what has been your experience since joining the council? Is it everything you thought it would be? Has there been any surprises? Is there something that you've learned that is awesome? Or is there some challenges? Whatever you want to share with us very briefly before we get into the serious conversations.
Well, thank you for that. And of course, thanks for having me today. And, you know, that's a big question, but I'll just give you some short on it. It is what I expected to some degree. In District 7, we have a really good group of active community members who have helped shape my policies and who support my values. And so they've put their trust in me, which is humbling. And I want to make sure that I live up to that. The positives include building rapport with other community leaders, with folks like you. You've become my friends. And that's, you know, it's been great to learn from your experience and everybody else's on the council, and also to understand your priorities. So that is something I've really enjoyed. And I think every one of us is working to create a better Nashville. So having all of those perspectives really gives us the opportunity to move Nashville really beyond where I alone think we should be headed. So the life experiences of other council members really provide a much broader vision. And so you know, I think that's a real positive thing. I'm very honored and proud to serve with you all. On the negatives, I'd say that there are some, and you know, really the biggest one for me is the speed at which changes in our government can be made. So there's a sense of we've tried that before, or that won't work, well, you know, which we've got to overcome. And so there's times that we need to push the envelope with the state, even though something may be preempted, or there are other times that it isn't worth the fight. I have to be much more strategic to get things done than I thought. And rather than, you know, being able to make an impactful change for Nashvillians. So an example would be, I want residents in Davidson County to be able to vote by mail now, but that's a decision only the state can make. So having my hands tied, quite frankly, really ticks me off. So it's a negative that I didn't anticipate that would happen as often as it does.
I'll tell you, as a fellow rookie council person, that that's one of my biggest things too. How much the states can actually preempt us, and how we don't have a lot of leeway to do a lot of things that we feel we need to do for our residents. And so I'm always going to say it. We've said it the last 2 episodes that people should be talking to our state representatives, but not just the one in Davidson County, because we have great ones and they usually do what we want. But if you have friends and families in other parts of Tennessee, make sure they're talking to their legislators too, so they can help us across the state. move things forward. So thank you, Emily. So I'm going to go to Freddie. You're not a rookie. You've been doing this for a while now. And so I think this is your fourth or fifth budget season. And so as somebody who's been on the council that long, this is not new for you. Can you just share with us before we go into the conversation about the substitute, what your experience has been like? What is the difference between prior budget season and this particular one that we are in?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of strange because after, watching the Metro budget process for a long time as a former board member of what was then Nashville MTA and is now WeGo Public Transit, I attended budget hearings for several years before being in a position where I was voting on the budget. And really, after getting elected in September of 2015, I think maybe the most striking thing is we really only had one normal budget cycle, right? We had the very first budget that any of us that were elected that cycle came into office on was the fiscal year 2017 budget. And then we had, strong revenues. It was kind of the property tax rate and budget were fairly aligned in a structural sense. And then fiscal year 18 was kind of the year where Mayor Berry famously declared in the state of Metro when I was at home with my new baby daughter in my lap, the only state of Metro I've missed. But I remember very distinctly hearing her declare that we were proposing to set the lowest property tax rate in the history of Metro government. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. And it's interesting for a couple reasons because, again, as a long observer of Metro, there've really been only two times in my adult lifetime where we have not adjusted after equalization to account for, costs greater than inflation and, thinking about investing in the city that we want to be. One of those was when Mayor Dean elected not to adjust property tax rates after equalization. And again, just a little bit of background here. The state requires that we equalize our property tax rates on the basis of our assessment. So when the property assessor's office goes around and makes determinations all across Davidson County what your property value is going to be, if they go do that, which they will be doing again next year, and it comes back and we have suddenly seen property values increase across Davidson County, which is pretty much what we saw recently. We've been growing. It's been a very successful city for several years. You can't basically just absorb a windfall without adjusting your taxes. In fact, you have to lower your property tax rate to keep the revenues equal from one fiscal year to the next after an assessment. So we have been steadily reducing our property tax rate even as property values in many areas have been going up. And so some people, despite that rate coming down because their properties have increased so dramatically, are paying more taxes. So we set that very low rate in fiscal year 2018. The Berry administration infamously collapsed in the middle of the discussions for that budget. And that was a really tough, or the year after that was really tough because we knew already that the forecasts were showing that we were going to have to abandon a 3-year pay plan. We had established during the good times, during that normal period. And that was my first extremely difficult vote on council was the fiscal year 19 budget, where that was when Councilmember Mendez put forward something that had never been done before, which was a council-led property tax adjustment that was not the chair's budget and did not follow a recommendation from the mayor to increase property taxes. Vice Mayor Briley had literally just become mayor as that budget cycle was happening, so that was very abnormal. So again, one normal year followed by setting foregoing an adjustment in the year of an assessment, which is not a normal piece of the budget cycle, setting it extremely low. Then we go straight into the collapse of one administration in the middle of the budget process. And then last year, even more remarkably, the Mendez approach got actually adopted by the chair of Budget and Finance, Taneka Vercher. And so the Vercher-Mendez budget was, again, an unprecedented moment where the chair's budget actually included a property tax rate that required an increase, which was not, again, what the mayor had recommended. This time, with Mayor Briley having served in office for a full year and still recommending keeping that property tax rate low. An important piece of that moment in history was that we, in FY20, I joined 19 other colleagues. We had a 20-18 vote on that budget, the Bertram Mendez, the chair's budget, which usually passes out of council, but we needed 21 votes. So in another moment of unprecedented periods in Metro history, many of which have occurred in the 5 years that I've been serving, council for the first time ever did not pass a budget, which meant that Mayor Briley's budget went into effect untouched. So very strange period of time that I've served on council. Mayor Cooper, then as an at-large council member, did not join the 20 of us who voted for that. And so, you know, basically you had a mayor and a mayoral candidate, neither of them sort of agreeing with the analysis that Councilmember Mendez had put out. He is now chair of Budget and Finance. I was actually really interested to see where he was going to come up with the budget until COVID landed in Nashville. And now we're once again in our fourth consecutive budget cycle that lacks precedent, right? We have just never seen this kind of economic calamity, really, even in the period of the Great Recession in Nashville. So really, really challenging 5 years so far.
Wow. Well, thank you for that overview. I think it's good for us to, so it's never been an easy budget year. That's what you're telling me. So Emily and I feeling that this is a very crazy year. You're saying it's not. I hope next year is better for all of us.
I'm
we
ready
can start
for
having it better.
Back in 2015, it was a period when governing almost seemed fun, and ever since, I feel like since that tough moment in 2018, we've just been dealing with challenge after challenge.
Wow. So I want us to get into what everyone wants to hear, which is your substitute budget. For those that are listening, I want to lay the ground rules. This is not a debate. This is for us to get information. This is for us to educate ourselves. This is for us, for me and all of you, to understand where the sponsors are coming from, but more importantly, for you to be able to ask them questions. And so what I will ask is that as you're listening, you should put your comments and your question in the chat box on Facebook. If you have a question for a particular panelist, put their name in there in your question. If it's just a general question for both of them, you don't have to put a name. Then the other thing that I want to say is that I ask everyone to be civil. You may not agree with the opinion of any of our panelists. It's okay. That's why we have differing opinions. If you have any comment, put it, but we don't want people to be rude. I ask you all to do that, but more than anything, I do want you to be engaged. So put your comments, put your question in there. We'll be taking the questions after both of our panelists have given an overview of their budget. So since Freddie led us off to the history of the budgeting process for the last 3 or 4 years, and he's the experienced one in this group, I want to start with him. So if you would tell us, and what I want to do is I try to make sure that we don't spend a lot of time talking. I want to get to the question. So I want the overview to be as brief as you can make it. Each of you should have about 5 to 7 minutes. And so we can have about 30 minutes for question and answers, because I think that's where it's going to be. So just give us a direct overview. What rate are you proposing? What are you cutting? What are you adding? Anything you want to add so people can understand how you get to where you are and what is the meat of your proposal. I'll start with Freddie.
All right, great. So my budget actually steps out of kind of the frame of trying to just treat this as a normal budget year. It simply isn't. We know that we've seen just across the United States for several weeks now, unemployment claims just jumping to places we haven't seen since the Great Depression. Last week, there was a Federal Reserve briefing that revealed that so far the estimate is that across the country, we've already lost 100,000 small businesses and a handful of larger businesses to the economic crisis that has been contingent with COVID, right? We are dealing with a global pandemic, and the national effect of that has been twofold, right? It is a public health crisis on the one hand, and it is an economic crisis on the other hand, because in part to respond to the public health dimensions, we have had to do things that we are just so unaccustomed to doing, right? So much of the response has meant that we are staying home, right? That we are limiting economic activity. When we do that, it hurts businesses, right? It is sometimes, but not always, a government decision. I think even now that we are seeing states and cities across the country move into a period of trying to open safely, that consumers are still making their own choices based on a sensibility that is driven by caution, right? We have, as of this weekend, Memorial Day weekend, we are approaching 100,000 Americans dead as a result of COVID-19 in just a matter of months, right? The first case in Nashville was March 5th. And so in just a few short weeks, we have seen the entire world as we know it change. I think to me, that says take a step back and don't treat this as an ordinary budget cycle where you're just trying to say, well, gosh, our revenues fell off sharply, and now we're faced with a couple things. We can either sharply increase the tax rate to kind of get us back up to where we need to be to maintain government, or we can make this a period of austerity, and we can make sharp cuts in government to align with that fall off. The approach I'm pursuing does rely on some factors beyond my control, right? We have been tracking the Federal Reserve and Treasury and acts of Congress have been steadily moving in the direction of some support for cities and counties. We have a vehicle called the Municipal Liquidity Facility that has extended credit on some terms to cities. We know that the HEROES Act passed out of the House has some provisions that give money directly to cities and states with no strings attached. The CARES Act did bring some money into local jurisdictions, but it was for COVID-19 related expenses and could not be used as effectively revenue replacement. So the structure of my budget says we're going to try to do a few things. We're going to try to bridge to FY22 when we should have a year of the COVID economy under our belts, have a little more stability in our forecasting ideally. Science should be catching up to the virus much more effectively by that point in terms of either antiviral treatments or possibly a vaccine. And what we do is we create space of $230 million in what we hope will be a mix of federal state grants that come in there. Really, Zulfat, my budget is a placeholder hoping for good news. If we get to mid-June and we don't have that good news, I don't think there's any way we can realistically pursue this, right? So, but what I'm trying to say is, I don't think this is the time to just say, well, let's pick one of these approaches, because they are on the table. We are either going to see, even with Mayor Cooper's recommended budget, it is a 32% increase with $1 increase to your property tax rates. It's substantial. Mine reduces it to 37 cents, relies on some what we hope will be support coming up soon. But in what I'm recommending in the budget, I made some adjustments to what the mayor's recommendations were. I think now is not the time to create a $5 million rainy day fund while it is pouring, especially while we are looking at $2 million in cuts to our Career Advancement Center and changing our workforce development programs wholesale, particularly where they impact youth. We were cutting the Nashville grad program by $1 million. We were cutting Opportunity Now by $2 million. My budget restores those. We were cutting nonprofits to the tune of almost $1 million. And again, my budget says some of these are effectively nonprofits doing social service work in a de facto contract that Metro has not acknowledged are actually what other Metro jurisdictions do to provide for their citizenry. So we also are protecting Metro employees. I restore a cost of living adjustment and step increases for both teachers and Metro employees across the board. So we're trying not to contribute even further to an unemployment crisis by allowing Metro to be a stabilizing factor here. So this is more than a wishful thinking budget. This is trying to leverage the fact that we have, a mayor and congressman who are brothers, and ideally we can get the best possible alignment out of our local and federal response possible. And that is the long and short of it.
All right. Thank you, Freddie. So to recap, it's a 37-cent increase.
Right.
It's as COLA for Metro employees and teachers. It's based on the fact that we will be getting the municipal liquidity facility from the federal government.
It could use any mix there that is non-credit, right? Any kind of federal or state financial support that can be offered directly to cities and states. We know there will be some of that. It's ultimately going to be a question of how substantial is that and what do we know about it by the time we are required to pass a budget.
Okay. And you did say that it is a placeholder. And so have you thought about what if we did not get any federal aid? So it's either a grant.
I think we're going to be looking at one of the other budgets, right? And that's, so that's where, but I do want to measure the overall support of council so that we understand, hey, if money did become available, could we pursue this approach? Or is this, I guess I look at it and say, in the midst of this economic crisis, if we have an option not to require all property owners in Davidson County to pitch in more, as we know, more households than ever before have dropped from 2 incomes to 1, that unemployment and underemployment are higher than they've ever been. I mean, I can already tell you stories from District 19 constituents who are looking at this and have seen the proposals and are very anxious, right? And so I'm looking to limit that anxiety, preserve Metro as a stability, and generally make sure that we are not cutting either at the margins or where we know we're going to have to grow workforce.
Thank you, Freddie. All right, I'm looking at the questions and I'm writing them down. Most of them are to both of you. There's some to Freddie, but I want to give Emily the chance to talk about our budget, our substitute, before we go into question and answer. So Emily, please share your thoughts and where you are, your rates, what your thoughts are, what are you increasing, what are you decreasing, and whatever you want us to know about your substitute budget.
Thank you, Zulfat. And I think Freddie covered a lot about how did we get here, but I think it's important as I go into what I'm proposing that I give a little bit of perspective on what I think and how we got here. So, it's a complicated thing how we got here, and something many Nashvillians validly may not understand, but I think a lot of them do as well. But going back a few years, of course, the city took a chance by making significant investments in building up our downtown and by taking advantage of also a hit television series that brought more attention to us. But if you look back to 2010, downtown was busy, but the only time that Broadway was jam-packed was during festivals like CMA or New Year's Eve. And so prior to the COVID pandemic, downtown was full of thousands of people every night of the week and many times during the day as well. So in other words, the investments that we made resulted in a boom and in becoming the IT city. While that boom was happening, we were slowly beginning to pay down the debt that was incurred to make downtown what it was. Certainly wasn't fast enough, but we were making some chinks in it. But Nashville wasn't the only place that was booming. The entire country had rebounded in a big way from the 2008 recession. So I know I'm going way back here. I think it's important. We had very good times and it seemed like we always would. And I liken it to getting a big promotion at work and making more money than ever. Nashville, however, during that big promotion time, we didn't fund a savings account. And we continued to buy the big, shiny, fun things, like economic incentives for job creation that may have happened on its own because we'd been a desirable place to be, rather than taking the responsible route of paying down our debt more. I like to go back to the analogy of running my household. It's one thing to have a mortgage, which is a debt on an investment that grows in value. But it's another thing to spend every dollar on frivolous things that aren't essential, like especially when you do it on credit. So eventually the bill shows up in the mail and you find yourself unable to pay it. Maybe you lost your job or got demoted or your income has shrunk to the point that you finally realized that you were living outside of your means. So over the course of a few years, previous administrations, and Freddie talked about this, and councils were handling our finances similar to the example of a household I just gave. We weren't building up our savings account. We ended up having to sell off assets, which, think about selling assets one time. It's the equivalent of, losing that promotion at work, getting demoted again and not having the income. It's the equivalent. Selling off a single asset is the equivalent of taking things to a pawn shop to get enough money to pay the electric bill. We weren't in that dire of a shape, but we were headed that way if we didn't make a correction, and we are now too. So in the last term, almost half the council, Freddie talked about that, tried to rectify this, and they were taking the responsible approach of working to increase our revenue, to put into savings, and to allow the city to provide responsible investments in our residents, especially in our educators who are responsible for creating our future police officers, business owners, and CEO. And when we froze the educators' pay and took away the parts of their compensation that they'd been promised when they took their jobs, that's what keeps me up at night. In all my years in corporate business, and I spent 19 years in corporate business, and I learned a ton, and that's not at all where my heart is. But during that experience, I never met a single executive who didn't get an education from a teacher. But which of them, the CEO or the teacher, which of them is pulling in millions of dollars per year? Our priorities are wrong. And then, finally, there's a recession on average every 10 years in the US, and we've been overdue since the last recession in 2008. They can be a good thing. They help us to stop spending money on the things that we don't really need, and we realize the importance of having that savings account. So the savings account, what you're hearing from me, is really important in the future. But I anticipated a recession at some point this year because of some economic factors, and I'm no economist, but there's some economic factors that I had heard about last year that made me realize that a recession was coming. I thought it was going to be in the fall. It came sooner, and it certainly packed a larger punch than I thought we were going to see. What with a tornado, and 10 days later, shutting down much of our economy because of COVID. So, I want to add in some statistics that Freddie mentioned as well. Our tax rate is at $3.15.5, and it's never been lower in the history of Metro government. In 1965, it was $5.30. And during the recession of 2008, it was $4.13, which would get us back 2008, that rate, the proposed increase by the mayor will get us almost back to that rate, which, we made it through during the recession. This is a much larger recession, there's no doubt. But every other major city in Tennessee, including Chattanooga, Clarksville, and even the city of Lebanon, have higher tax rates than Nashville. We're simply not bringing in enough revenue to cover the higher costs that we're incurring. We all have higher costs due to inflation, but because we didn't spend our money responsibly over the past few years, it's caught up to us, and we have to make a change. And quite frankly, the state comptroller is also requiring us to make a change. So for me, we have Metro employees who are providing services from academics and schools to social services, like helping the homeless, and public safety and low-income housing, and weekly trash pickup, and maintaining our streets and our sewer, as well as juvenile rehabilitation and incarceration. Sorry, not just juvenile incarceration, but one of the basic functions of government is to rehabilitate anybody who has committed crimes. So those are all things that we do, but even throughout our boom, those folks had their pay frozen, and our revenues have not kept up with our needs to serve the growing community, and also to pay the debt notes that are now due. But we have had areas to cut, and I think we have had an austerity budget going back, and I said that during the inauguration speech. For 3 years, we've continually asked our departments to cut their budget. And just in the current fiscal year, we've cut our employees' pay. We've left hundreds of public safety and education jobs empty. And we have departmental savings in the millions. So we've made significant cuts. We've asked our employees to make the sacrifices, and those savings carry over into the new fiscal year. But just as at my house, our day-to-day costs have risen. Our cable bill is higher, our internet is higher, and Metro is subject to growing operational costs too. So I believe that if we want to have the same level of service from government that we've always had, then we're going to have to pay more for it. Of course, if we're willing to make a sacrifice and have less level of service, a smaller level of service, then we can make those cuts. I just don't think that that's where, I think we've made as many cuts as we can in order to serve the community as best as possible. So our tax rate simply has to be corrected. And the mayor, as a council member, didn't understand that the past 3 years, I guess. But he does now. I'm not sure how it wasn't obvious that our savings were dwindling and that we needed to correct our tax rate, but it's time now, and that's understood. So The reassessment, of course, in 2017, Freddie talked about that. That brought our tax rate down, and unfortunately, some of the areas of the city had a huge home valuation increase, and therefore tax bill. My area, my district is one where we had on average 70%, but there are more affluent neighborhoods across the city where their tax burden actually decreased. It's not fair. It's not right. It's not equitable. Unfortunately, property tax is one of the only tools that we have to increase revenues in the city. So the biggest thing, one of the on the savings, and sorry, Zulfat, I know I've talked a long time. I promise I'm about to wrap up, but we have 2 days of operational savings on hand, which means if today we had no additional revenue today, if everything cut off, nobody spent a single dollar, if we stopped everything, all revenue coming in, we'd have to shut down all city services on Tuesday. Police, fire, schools, done. We have 2 days of savings. The mayor's budget proposes building that up to about 4 days, and I believe we need to do that. Of course, that's not where anybody wants to be. But so my substitute, getting into the details now, education is one of the things during my campaign I spoke a lot about, and I've actually had a number of people come back to me and send me emails recently that said, Emily, you promised that there was no limit to the tax increase you would propose as long as our schools were fully funded. And so that has a lot to do with the moral budget that I'm putting forward, which will highlights the need to pay our teachers a livable wage. It gets the 1,500 plus employees who make less than $15 an hour up to $15 an hour, which is just $31,000 a year. It includes reinstating teacher step increases, which are a part of the pay plan when teachers sign up, when they're hired. And I also give them a 5% raise. So that equates to a 14-cent tax increase. And that's the bulk of the increase that I'm proposing. However, when we interviewed the schools MNPS last week, we asked hard questions. A lot of us did. I'm particularly interested in fixing the top-heavy pay in the central office. We have more than 10 people in the administration, in the MNPS administration, that make more money than the mayor. It's $180,000 per year. Now, this isn't going to create the savings that we need to balance our budget, but I just think that it's reprehensible that we have people who are making this much money when our teachers are making $44,000 a year on average. So we shouldn't be in a position where so many people make so much and so very few make so little. We also don't provide our teachers with the resources to be successful in the classroom. Children don't have their own textbooks in classes. They have to buddy up in class in order to use them. They can't take books home. And so, I think, again, as a moral document, as a moral budget, how can we expect to elevate our kids' futures when we hold them back from reaching their full potential? So that's, we need to focus on teaching and allowing our teachers to, they've done a phenomenal job. The results that they get are phenomenal with the few resources they have. So my budget also, like Freddie's, reinstates some of the programs that the mayor's budget cuts. So Nashville Community Education provides low or even no cost opportunities to learn new skills, which can be put to work in the city right away. And he proposes taking that program away in its entirety. I provide funding to Metro General, which has lost a lot of revenue throughout the COVID crisis. However, my allocation to them comes with strings. That's $3 million that goes to them. It would restore their normal level, or what their current fiscal year level of funding is. However, the strings that I put there is if the federal government provides additional CARES Act or similar relief, then those dollars will go back into our general fund. I restore funding to Opportunity Now. Freddie already explained that. And I reinstate full funding to the Arts Commission, which we're a city of artists. And so this creates hundreds of jobs in the community, and that's a population that already has low income. So it will help grow that as well. So the last thing I've got, sorry, Zulfat, is that one thing I was unable to find funding for, and it ticks me off, I couldn't find it, but we impounded $5 million from the Barnes Fund. The administration impounded $5 million from the Barnes Fund for this current fiscal year. And I cannot find a way to get that in the budget. And I really wish I could, because that is a program that helps so many underserved Nashvillians. Those are the details. Thank you, Z.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Emily, so much. One thing I did not catch, I think you had said 14-cent increases when we're talking about the teachers. Is your rate 14-cent increase, or is it more than that?
It's 16 in total.
It's 16, okay. But about 14% goes to the teachers.
That's correct. 14 cents.
Okay.
Yep, of the 16 cents goes to
Of the
teachers.
16 cents. Okay. And so as a recap, yours mainly focus on the teachers. We're looking at a step increases for teachers. You're recommending a 5% rate for them as well. You're also interested in making sure that you fix the top heavy and make sure that not a lot of people in administration is making too much. You also have money in for Metro General, but you also want some oversight. That's the gist of your substitute. So thank you both so much. Like I said, I want us to limit our talking because I want to open it up to a lot of questions. I do want to say there were 4 substitutes that are submitted or that are being proposed. I did invite Councilmember Steve Glover to join us, but unfortunately he's out of town today, and so we wish him a safe travels. I also invited Budget Chair Bob Mendez as well, but he's still working on his proposal, and so I see Bob is joining us on the comment. Thank you for watching and for your comments, but I will invite Bob back maybe next week or 2 to actually come and talk about his substitute. And so, so thank you everyone for watching. So there's a couple of comments and questions that's already there. And I'm going to start with this one for both of you. And the question is, when you were figuring out your rate, whether decrease or increase, did you factor in a different one for GSD and USD, or is it the same increase for both?
Same.
Same.
Yep, same.
All right. Then another question that we have is, a council member proactively, has any of you tried to reach out to the comptroller? You all talk about things that we want to do that we cannot do, whether the comptroller will allow us or not. Have you proactively reached out to the comptroller to see if you allow us some leeway because of the times that we're in?
Zulfat, I had a good conversation with the comptroller's office about some potential legislative approaches. One thing that I had looked at was, could we, knowing that the General Assembly is about to come into emergency session at the beginning of June, look at something where we could ask them to, for instance, under the Improve Act, one of the ways we had proposed funding, one of the tools that was embedded in the Improve Act was a sales tax surcharge. This would not actually it would not exhaust your local option sales tax cap, but I looked at the prospect of a temporary sales tax surcharge that would work similarly to the way the mechanic was under the Improve Act. So I had a conversation with their office. They did not seem to think that this session was likely to have much capacity for that. And, you know, again, the comptroller's office has not been shy in commenting about Nashville being years behind in its revenue collections, and I think that perspective is still intact, right? So I think they recognize that we're overdue for restructuring our budget. And I think the biggest conversation right now is, will we have the tools available to do that next year with an assessment in hand or not? But I have spoken to the comptroller's office about, you know, various things that would require legislative action. They were skeptical that any of those could go forward.
There's also a concern here that I think both of you had said that your rate is the same for USD and GSD, but people are talking about the differences in the services being received. So how do you justify having the same rate increase? I know it's not the same rate overall when you look at it, but the level of the increase is still the same. Do you have any thoughts on that before I go to the next one?
Yeah, I think, you know, so the entire county is the GSD. And then we have the USD that, you know, my district is completely USD. Freddie's district is completely USD. And I think that, you know, I saw one of our colleagues mention that there's not as much representation. The districts have changed as the city has grown. And although the GSD footprint has hardly changed, the representation hasn't necessarily been there. So I think there absolutely is merit to having the debate and to see if that needs to be adjusted different from what it is today. Again, I want to make sure that what we levy will fund teachers, will fund our schools, that will fund the community services that the residents need and are asking for. But I do see some merit in, in looking at that and seeing, should that be adjusted, and what are the services, and really how much do they cost, and therefore how should we adjust that rate? How much does it cost for streetlights? How much does it cost for garbage pickup, that to the USD? And so therefore, how much of a credit should we give potentially to the GSD for those services they're not providing? I think it's definitely, we need to look at that. It's time.
Yeah, so I mostly agree with Emily there. A couple of key points. The reason there are two different districts is because there are two different service levels, right? And similarly to Emily's point, the USD has actually expanded. It expanded last term. So the USD is larger than it was previously. Population growth occurs more quickly in the USD, right? So generally the cost of services winds up being a little higher. The density of those services, including number of schools, et cetera, is higher in the USD. And so I think as we think about how to fund the entire county, we do want to think about that. We also want to think about precedent. I'd have to go back and look at in a standard year, like again, set FY21 apart. This is a budget cycle unlike anybody alive has seen, much less tried to govern through. And I think we do need to go back to Emily's point and have that discussion. I know Councilmember Mendez has already suggested that whatever we do in this budget cycle, we want to get regular reviews of where we are on collections to understand, as our forecasting ability improves across the early stages of fiscal year 21, can we come back and revisit whatever levy is out there? And I think that's going to be important.
And so this question, thank you both. This question is for Freddie, and it's a two question. So I'm going to read the two of them because it has to do with the loan part of your proposal. And the question is, does your budget violate Metro policy? That's the first part of the question. The second part is it true that the comptroller would not allow Metro to borrow money for operating budget?
Yeah, so the first part, we do not go as far as Mayor Cooper's budget does in terms of fund replenishment, which would leave us a little bit short of policy. If we knew by the time of approaching the need to pass this that we had to go there, and this is contingent upon having knowledge about what good news might come before we have to approve a budget. I guess to me, the choice is keep an option available that allows us to make our decisions based on information that is changing rapidly now, rather than having to overshoot and then kind of walk it back sometime before this fall. And I'd like to keep that option on the table. So the other part of the question about, go back to part two. What was the second part?
The second part is that you think the controller would allow us to borrow money for operating budget.
No, and so we know that that's not going to be permissible. So the last conversation I had with the administration, with Metro Finance, and with our legal counsel is that the structure of this budget is very likely legal if we are considering the placeholder funds as grants, right? And again, that's only going to be possible if the money is there. If we get to the moment of the vote and we do not have good news, I cannot run this budget.
Okay. And I think that somebody was asking you, if you're not able to run it, can you think of another place to get a one-time cash other than the federal government? And I'm guessing
no, I mean, that's again, I looked at that sales tax surcharge. I've looked at basically everything that we could put on the table, unless our peers in the General Assembly decide they want to do something to help Nashville on a one-time basis. I think we're, again, we're going to be looking to people who are trying to support cities and counties across America, and that's going to very likely involve federal action. I'm not anticipating that the state is looking to, with the perspective of the comptroller's office, effectively give us a grant to get us to a moment when we can more strategically, more deliberatively address our structural imbalances.
So there's a question about, and I think we answered this the last two sessions that we have. This is coming up a lot, but it's out there, so I'm going to ask you guys. Someone is asking whether we've looked into developers' fees, if that's an option in any of your budget or even just for Metro in general.
we cannot do impact fees legally, Zulfat. It's something that sadly we did not make a very good, we made, let's say, a weak effort to try to change state law to allow Metro to more easily access impact fees, which would, you know, the fiscal note associated with that bill in the General Assembly this year, I think, was on the order of $100 million. That's obviously, that would be great if it passed. I was extremely disappointed that a Chattanooga area representative helped kill it in committee. Even if it had not died in committee, I think the chances of it succeeding on the floor were slim, especially considering that the General Assembly did not complete this entire portion of the session. But, you know, I think we've seen controversy about the application of impact fees in Williamson County already. It is a tool we are eventually going to need in the Metro toolbox. I hope we continue to pursue it. I hope we continue to pursue it more aggressively than we did this year, but it is not available to us at the moment.
Okay. Thank you. I want to encourage the people that are listening. I see a lot of comments in the chats. I'm looking for questions. I don't see a lot of questions. If I miss your question because it's a lot to stroll up and down, would you please, if you don't mind, type it again so I can get into it if I do miss it. While I'm looking, Emily, I'm going to go into you. Your substitute, which is actually an increase to the mayor's proposal, is weighed heavily on the teachers, like you said. So you're talking about increases, 5% increase, you're talking about cost of living adjustment. And the question is, we did ask this last week too, a lot of people are losing their jobs. Businesses are laying off. How do you justify asking the taxpayer to pay more taxes so we can pay a segment of our community when other segments are losing money?
Yeah, and it's such an important question that we all need to answer during this budget cycle. And, you know, my goal is to have a moral budget that'll keep our economy afloat in the coming year. Metro's the third largest employer in the city. And if we don't make investments in our workers, then, you know, there are ancillary impacts that are going to, that'll keep our economy on the decline during this time of uncertainty. So I think when we talk about impact fees, you know, or any other ways to raise revenue. Unfortunately, we live in a state that only allows us two major ways to levy taxes, and that's sales tax and property tax. And sales tax is much more regressive than property tax, but neither one of them really are equitable. I think later this year, once we have a better idea of our sales tax revenue, I anticipate that we'll reevaluate that before the tax bills go out in October. And, you know, even right now, I want to find a way to open up downtown safely so that we can get revenue going soon. But we have to make sure we're safe. We simply cannot rush into opening up our entertainment sector, you know, too quickly. But we have headwinds that the entire community will face, and we'll face it together. By funding services to our residents, we'll keep the economy going, and it'll help us bounce back more quickly. I do think there is merit. We've got to find some federal help, and that, you know, I hope that we're able to get some unrestricted cash from the federal government that we're allowed to use for operating budget. I think that many counties and cities around the country need that.
And I will echo that. I think that we all should, those of you listening in, we all should be reaching out to our federal legislators and making sure that they understand that cities matters. And whatever help we get as a cities, will be able to help our citizens the more. And so please reach out to them, tell them that we want them to make some of this money unrestricted, we want them to loosen the restrictions on these funds so that it can go directly to the people, so that it can help people. And that's something that we all can do, not just those of us on the council. And so there's a question for both of you, and it's about the non-for-profit. Can you share your substitute? What does it have for non-for-profit? We don't have a lot of time. I want to make sure that we answer as many questions as we can. And so just let me know if you're keeping the mayors, or if you've added any, or you're taking away from the, whatever you've done with non-for-profits in both of your substitutes.
So I'll go first if you want. I'm funding the Arts Commission. I'm funding the grad program. I'm funding the Opportunity Now. I'm funding Metro General Hospital. The community education. What I think we ought to cut away is the other $175,000 that we're still giving the Chamber of Commerce, right? We cut that in half, but they're still getting $175,000. What do they need that for when they have so many rich corporate members? I don't think they need that type of money from us when we could move that. $175 is a lot of money to think about our employees and what they make.
Does yours have the bonds fund in it?
It has just what the mayor has 10 million in the Barnes Fund. I wanted to put that 5 million back in there. I just felt like I really couldn't go higher than 16 cents. 15 cents was really the highest I wanted to go. I didn't want to go that far, but I pressed it and it was 16 is what I came up with.
Freddie, what does yours have as it relates to not-for-profits?
Very similar. I restore $900,000 in nonprofit funding, and along the lines of what Emily has put in there, we're trying to save. I've heard countless stories of people who have benefited from our community education program. I think it would be a mistake to cut that right now. I put 1.2 million back into the Arts Commission. So we're generally consistent there. I'm a little bit torn on the chamber piece because the chamber is really, that piece of the budget is there for a contract that is really a part of the economic development initiatives, but we also are operating without a director of economic and community development right now. So I will say I am a little bit anxious with the mayor's recommended budget. We are making a $2 million cut to the Nashville Career Advancement Center. We are making a $1 million cut to Nashville Grad. We are making a $2 million cut to Opportunity Now. And we are eliminating even more of that workforce and economic development capacity. If we come out the other side of this and we need the economy to resume the growth we had previously in terms of good paying jobs, and we keep our focus on equity, I am a little concerned that we are shredding so much of that, including on that workforce component. But I think ultimately we need to be mindful of how the overall economy is structured. And so we'll have to keep having that question.
Does either of you think that a conversation about a state income tax, I know it may not impact this budget cycle, but do you think we need to bring that up? Is this something that we as a state should consider?
Absolutely. It's so much less regressive than the tax levies that we've got in the state. So, if we could levy an income tax, it's just like the federal income tax. The rate changes the more money you make. And so again, when we've got people who are making egregious amounts of money while we've got so few people barely able to get by, we need to correct that, in my opinion. It's simply unfair. And an income tax is one way that helps us do that more equitably, much like with the tax rate. We can't tax people in Belmead or Forest Hills, and I'm not saying everybody there can afford it, but overall, those are affluent neighborhoods in our city. We can't tax them at a higher rate than we tax people in North Nashville. And so the rate stays the same. It's just regressive. And an income tax is one way that would be less regressive and it would provide more equity. I think the temperature at the state legislature and in the administration and the executive branch, I don't think that the support is there. But I think, depending on the economic headwinds that we face and for how long we face them, it's a conversation I hope that we're able to get them to have.
Freddie.
So, we've got a constitutional amendment at the state level prohibiting enactment of an income tax. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, but I do think that if we continue pressing the case, we could enable Metro to get impact fees, which would help us with our infrastructure costs. Even before we got to this moment, yes, we had some structural problems with our budget that lasted most of this cycle. Those were still relatively short-term issues that we could have resolved and repeatedly chose not to. We came very close to resolving them, but we could not get a 21-vote majority to resolve some of that structure before now. Had we taken action last year, we would be in better shape this year. I just think that I'd rather focus on better control over our property tax relief programs that are administered by the county trustees across Tennessee. I'd rather fight for impact fees so we can get a handle on our long-term infrastructure crisis that will still be a crisis when COVID is gone, and really have robust conversations about what Metro can and should be investing in and how we can do that, including in things like transit and education.
All right. Somebody asked, and real quick, if you will speak to this, does any of your substitute includes follows for Metro employees? Yes or no?
No.
No.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you one other question. I don't see anything there right now, and this has to do with the reserve. So for you, Freddie, we're spending up our reserve. So what happens if we have another crisis in the next month or two? How do we survive? For you, Emily, you putting more in the coffers, you putting more cash balance, more in the fund balance. The question is this the time to do that when people are really struggling? I mean, for both of you, what do you say to that?
I mean, the truth of the matter is, Ulfat, and we heard this last week in the budget and finance conversations, that, you know, with looking at $600+ million in tax anticipation notes for interfund borrowing, we know we're going to be looking at cash flow issues for most of this first part of fiscal year 21. You know, $10 million, $20 million in those fund reserves is not going to be the thing that breaks us, right? It's going to be whether unemployment hits 30% or, you know, winds up being like, if the economic recovery looks like it's going to take 10 years instead of 3 years, some of these big macro level issues are going to be the things that we're looking at. I think the bigger question is, this is an impossible year, I think, to have the strategic and structural conversations we want to have about the budget. My hope is that FY22 comes and we can have those. A concern is if we you know, do this now, it's actually going to be harder in some ways to have a disciplined conversation about what Metro should look like when we are stable, because we're not going to know if it turns out by FY22 and we're in the range of having done $1, what does it look like? I mean, I don't think in the history of Metro either we've ever actively reduced the tax levy. I don't know where we're going to be after the next assessment, right? And I think it's better to have high quality information in hand. And I want to have a good discussion that lets us plan for 4 years and hope that we're not going to have a COVID-like crisis that lasts that long.
There's one or two more that I want to make sure that we get into before we end. And this is about, yes.
I'm sorry.
So if you can answer very briefly, so I can go because we're running out of time.
Yep. So of the top 25 cities in the country, we have 2 days of operational cash on hand, and that's last place. Out of the top 25 cities, the average is 4 months of cash on hand. The mayor's proposal will get us to 14 days. We're still not even close. We've got to start doing this. It's our cushion for however long this crisis lasts and whatever might be coming next. If there's a spike in the fall, for instance.
So there's a question for all three of us. This is about the CARES Act and the money that we have already, the 121 million. We talked about it a lot last week, but yes or no, do you support that we should use part of that COVID money for renters relief and for small businesses support? There's something put up by Stand Up Nashville. Shout out to Odessa. Yep. She's on the call, but she wanted to know, do we all support it? I'm a yes. And so what about the two of you?
Absolutely. In fact, we're overdue for planning for that. We've seen a report just this week from Bloomberg Cities about San Antonio, which already had a $25 million fund for people to apply for rent and mortgage assistance. I mean, this is a place where we've got $121 million so far last week, like pulling teeth to get from this administration, even who was thinking about it. We've known since March we were going to be struggling, and I'm amazed that we have not made progress in planning for the expenditures of these funds. Even after the announcement of who was thinking about it, we still don't have a plan. And I'm very glad that Councilmember Mendez and others on council have pushed for better oversight from council and more urgency from council. And I'm absolutely supportive of Stand Up's proposal.
Wow. Thank you all for joining. This has been a very interesting conversation. Please keep the conversation going on the Facebook Live. I think my panelists will be joining and responding to some of your questions and your thoughts once we wrap up. I want to thank Councilmember Bob Mendez for joining in. He's providing a lot of comments and questions on there. I do want him to come on, him and Steve Glover, to come and talk about the substitute budget so that you all will have an opportunity to ask them questions as well. I think we want to know about all four. We want to be able to understand it. We want to be able to ask questions so that we can make what we believe is the best decision for the city. I want to thank everyone that's on, all of the council members that joined. I can see all of you. I cannot list all of you, and all of the activists and community members that have joined. For more questions, you can reach any of us or three of us by email. You can also check out my Facebook. This video will be on the Metro Nashville network within 48 hours. It will also still be on my Facebook Live, but for those of you that missed it, share it with your friends, send us questions. Again, we want your thoughts. We want to be an engaging process. We want to be a budget that works for all of us. And so thank you all for joining. And so we'll send out information about next week, and I hope that you will join us then. Again, remember that there will be public hearing on June 2nd. Please participate. Every opportunity that you have to make your voice heard, to make sure that you're engaging as we make the decision, I think we want you to do it. So thank you, Emily. Thank you, Freddie. Thank you, everyone that joining. I look forward to seeing you all next week. And to all my Muslim friends and family that are celebrating Eid tomorrow, today is the official end day of Ramadan. And so we're about to start eating. Oh my God, yay. And the restaurant are opening at the right time. So I hope everybody have a wonderful Eid and a happy Memorial Day to everyone. We remember all our lost heroes, people that have lost their lives fighting for our country. And so everyone take care, stay engaged, stay safe, wash your hands, use the mask, social distancing, all of that. Thank you all so much. You have a nice afternoon. Bye, guys.